I came home from a 3-week job in Wyoming to find an empty driveway and the kind of silence that makes your chest tight. Not the good kind of quiet you get after a long day of honest work, but the hollow kind that tells you something important has been stolen while your back was turned. The spot where my father's 1974 Ford F-250 always sat was just bare concrete with 2 oil stains marking where something irreplaceable used to be. Those stains looked like accusation marks, dark and permanent against the garage floor. I stood there with my welding bag over my shoulder, boots still caked with Wyoming mud, staring at empty space and feeling that familiar tightness in my jaw that comes when someone's about to tell you something you don't want to hear. My wife Brenda didn't even look up from her phone when I walked through the door. She was perched at the kitchen counter in those expensive yoga pants that never saw the inside of a gym, scrolling through what looked like real estate listings. The house smelled like vanilla candles and fresh paint samples, the scent of a woman who spends other people's money redecorating her cage. "I sold it," she said, casual as discussing the weather. "Shane needed $35,000 for his wedding. Deposits were due yesterday." For a moment, I just stood there processing what she'd said, the way you do when machinery breaks down unexpectedly and you need to figure out which part failed first. The refrigerator hummed, a neighbor's Harley rumbled past outside, and I felt a stupid urge to chase after it, like maybe this was all some kind of mistake that could be fixed by running fast enough. "You sold what exactly?" I asked, keeping my voice level the way you do when you're talking to a foreman who's about to make a decision that'll get someone hurt. "The truck, Wade, your dad's old pickup. It was just sitting there collecting dust." She finally looked up, annoyed like I was interrupting something important. "Shane's getting married in 6 weeks. Be supportive for once." The Ford, my father's pride and joy. The truck he'd spent 15 years restoring in our garage, teaching me how to read metal like a book, how to weld fender patches that would outlast the frame itself. Dark blue paint job so perfect it looked like it was still wet after 20 years. Custom welding rack he'd fabricated with his own hands. Toolbox worth more than most people's cars. Keith Tucker had built that truck the way he built everything else in his life. Methodical, precise, built to last longer than the man who made it. Every bolt had been torqued to specification. Every weld had been ground smooth and painted over. It wasn't just transportation. It was a master class in doing things right the first time. "Where?" I asked. "Fort Collins. Some classic car place. They paid fair market value." She went back to her phone, dismissing me like hired help. $35,000 cash. Shane needed help with the venue. Shane. Her 26-year-old son, who called himself a social media entrepreneur and hadn't held a real job since high school. The kid who thought manual labor was beneath him and spent his days making TikTok videos about cryptocurrency and drop-shipping schemes that would make him rich without ever getting his hands dirty. The kind of man my father would have described as all hat and no cattle. I walked past her without another word and went straight to the garage, hit the overhead light and stared at the empty space where the truck should have been. The concrete was cleaner where it had sat, a perfect rectangle outlined in decades of accumulated dust. No more Saturday morning coffee shared with my dad while we planned the day's work. No more lessons in the difference between doing something and doing something right. That's when the grief finally caught up with me, 6 months late but right on time. Keith Tucker had been gone since winter. Sudden heart attack while I was working a high-rise project in downtown Denver. I'd come home for the funeral, handled the paperwork, kept moving, because that's what you do when the world doesn't stop spinning just because your compass needle broke. But that truck was the one thing that still made him feel close, still made the garage smell like WD-40 and determination and the particular satisfaction that comes from building something with your hands that will outlast your great-grandchildren. Behind me, the door from the house opened. Brenda's heels clicked across the concrete like a countdown timer. "Are you seriously pouting about this?" she asked. I turned around. "You sold my father's truck to pay for your son's wedding." "Our son," she corrected, sharp as a cutting torch. "And it was just sitting here, dead weight." "No," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "Shane is 26 years old. He's not my son, and he's old enough to pay for his own party." Her face went red like she'd been caught in a lie, which she had. "You don't understand what it's like trying to help family when you're never here." "I understand work," I said. "I understand earning what you keep. I understand respecting what isn't yours." She threw her hands up in that theatrical way she'd perfected over the years. "Oh, here we go with the blue-collar honor speech. It's just a truck, Wade. Metal and rubber. Just a truck. Like saying the Statue of Liberty is just copper and stone. Like saying your wedding ring is just a circle of gold. Some people understand that objects carry weight beyond their material composition. And some people see price tags where others see priceless. That truck was his legacy," I said. "Your dad is dead," she snapped. "You can't drive a memory." Something cold and final clicked into place in my chest. The same feeling I get when I'm about to make a perfect weld. Everything lined up just right, the metal telling me exactly what it needs. "I didn't come home to be robbed," I said quietly. Her mouth opened, then shut. Her phone buzzed with a text, and she glanced down, already moving on to the next thing. "I'm showing a house in Cherry Hills," she said. "Try not to be dramatic when I get back." The garage door slammed. I stood there alone, staring at empty concrete and oil stains, and did the only thing that made sense. I pulled out my phone and started making calls, because my father had taught me this too. When someone takes what isn't theirs, you don't scream and you don't break things. You document, you breathe, and you handle it the right way. The way that leaves no room for argument. First call went to my union rep, Clay. 20 years of friendship, worked side by side on more construction projects than I could count. He answered on the second ring like he always did, voice rough from cigarettes and honest work. "Wade, how's the Wyoming job treating you?" "It's over," I said. "Clay, I need a favor. You know anyone in the classic car business around Fort Collins?" "Maybe. What kind of trouble you in?" I told him everything. The truck, Brenda, Shane, the whole mess laid out like blueprints on a table. Clay listened without interrupting, the way good union guys do when a brother needs backup. When I finished, there was silence except for the sound of him lighting up another Marlboro. "That's a damn shame," he said finally. "Keith was solid people. That truck meant something." "Yeah, it did. Give me an hour. I'll make some calls." While I waited, I made my second call to my dad's lawyer, the guy who'd handled his will. Simple stuff, mostly, but Keith Tucker had been thorough about his paperwork. Always said important things don't get left to chance, especially when you're dealing with people who think rules are suggestions. "Mr. Tucker," the lawyer said, "what can I do for you?" Question about my father's estate, the Ford pickup. Was there anything specific in his documents about that vehicle? Papers rustled on the other end, the sound of bureaucracy working exactly the way it's supposed to. "Actually, yes. Your father was quite explicit about the truck. He established a small trust specifically for it. You're the sole beneficiary. I have the paperwork right here." My heart started pounding like a jackhammer on concrete. What does that mean exactly? It means the vehicle wasn't part of the marital property. Your wife had no legal authority to sell it. I thanked him and hung up, hands shaking now. Not from anger, from something bigger. The feeling you get when you realize your father was playing chess while everyone else was playing checkers. Keith Tucker, methodical to the end, had seen this coming years before it happened. Smart money says he'd watched Brenda long enough to know exactly what kind of woman she was. The kind who sees dollar signs where other people see sentiment. The kind who thinks everything has a price because she's never owned anything priceless. Clay called back 30 minutes later, and I could hear the satisfaction in his voice. The tone of a man delivering good news to someone who deserves it. "Found your truck," he said. "Mountain View Classic Cars in Fort Collins. Owner's name is Brett Hoffman. Good guy, does honest business. I told him you'd be coming by." "Clay, I owe you." "No, you don't. Just get your dad's truck back where it belongs." That night, I didn't sleep. Not because I was angry, but because I was planning. There's a difference between rage and determination. The same difference between a grinder and a precision torch. One destroys everything it touches, the other cuts exactly where you want it to. I lay there staring at the ceiling fan, counting rotations and thinking about all the ways this could play out. Brenda thought she'd pulled a fast one, selling something while I was away and presenting me with a done deal. What she didn't understand was that my father hadn't raised a fool, and he sure hadn't raised a quitter. Some men would have screamed, some would have thrown things or stormed out, or demanded the money back through sheer volume. But Keith Tucker had taught me something more valuable than anger, patience. The kind of methodical, step-by-step approach that builds skyscrapers and restores classic trucks and catches thieves in their own traps. Morning came gray and cold, the kind of Colorado dawn that makes you grateful for strong coffee and honest work. I made my coffee the way my dad taught me, too strong, no nonsense, and drank it standing by the window, watching frost lift off the lawn. The driveway looked wrong without the truck, like a picture with the centerpiece cut out. Brenda came down tying her robe, already checking her phone for messages from clients who needed her to show them houses they couldn't afford. Real estate, the profession of selling dreams on credit. "You're still on this?" she said, not asking. "I'm thinking," I said. She scoffed. "You think too much. When you've been gone over there working, everyone jumps when you say jump. This is real life. Real life. Where you sell something that isn't yours and expect your husband to just take it. Where you raise a son to believe the world owes him something because his mother says so. Where $35,000 is just a number on a wedding invoice instead of 15 years of a man's life poured into American steel. Real life," I repeated. "Where you sell something that isn't yours." She leaned against the counter, arms crossed like a woman preparing for battle. "You were gone for months, Wade. Wyoming, then before that, Utah, then Colorado Springs. I handled the bills. I handled the house. Shane came to me panicking. A man helps his family." The word man again. She used it like a weapon, like an accusation. The kind of manipulation that works on guys who haven't learned the difference between being a man and being a pushover. But my father had taught me that real men don't let people steal from them just to avoid conflict. "I didn't authorize the sale," I said. "You didn't need to," she said. "It was in our garage, our house." "That truck was in probate," I said. "You knew that?" She waved it off like swatting a fly. "Paperwork technicalities. You always hide behind paperwork." Paperwork technicalities. The same paperwork that keeps bridges from falling down and buildings from collapsing and thieves from getting away with it. The same paperwork my father had used to protect what mattered from people who thought rules were optional. "Paperwork is how you keep things straight," I said. "It's how you keep your hands clean." That afternoon, I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. Told my foreman I had family business to handle, which was true enough. Then I climbed into my pickup and headed north toward Fort Collins, driving slow and steady, thinking about justice and patience and the particular satisfaction that comes from watching a thief realize they've been caught. The dealership sat on the edge of Fort Collins like a museum of American dreams, rows of restored classics gleaming under the pale Colorado sun, Mustangs and Camaros and Chevelles lined up in perfect formation, each one representing thousands of hours of someone's life spent chasing perfection with sandpaper and chrome polish. Inside smelled like leather and motor oil, the good kind of smell that means somebody cares about their work. The showroom was clean but not sterile, organized but not precious. This was a place where people understood the difference between restoration and renovation, between bringing something back to life and just making it look pretty. Brett Hoffman was maybe 40, with calloused hands and oil under his fingernails. The real deal, not some suit selling dreams to weekend warriors. He looked me in the eye when he shook my hand, the way men do when they've got nothing to hide. "Mr. Tucker, Clay said you'd be coming by. Sorry for your loss." "Thank you. About the truck." "Yeah, we got it yesterday. Beautiful restoration work. Your father did that himself?" "Every bolt," I said. "Taught me most of what I know about metalwork on that beast." Brett nodded slowly, the way a craftsman does when he recognizes another man's skill. "Well, there's something you should know. After we took it in, I was going through the paperwork and noticed some irregularities. The title transfer didn't look quite right." He paused, studying my face. "Then I found this." He led me through the showroom, past a '67 Impala that probably cost more than my house, out to the lot where my father's truck sat in the afternoon sun. Still perfect, still proud, still carrying itself like it knew its own worth. Brett opened the tailgate and pulled up the bedliner. Underneath was a small access panel I'd never noticed in 20 years of working on that truck, held down with 4 screws that looked newer than the rest of the hardware. "Your father left very specific instructions," Brett said. "Said if the truck ever changed hands without your direct authorization, we should call you immediately." My heart started hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Keith Tucker, methodical to the end, planning for contingencies I hadn't even considered, The man had been playing three-dimensional chess while the rest of us were still learning checkers. Brett unscrewed the panel with practiced efficiency. Inside was a manila envelope and a small digital recorder, both wrapped in plastic like evidence in a crime scene. My name was written across the envelope in my father's careful block lettering, the same handwriting that had marked every tool in his workshop. "There's more," Brett said. "Your father paid us a retainer 3 years ago to handle this exact situation. Said you'd understand when the time came." My hands trembled as I opened the envelope. Trust documents, notarized and dated, clear as daylight. The truck belonged to a trust with me as the sole beneficiary. It was never Brenda's to sell. She'd stolen something that legally belonged to a dead man and his son, which made her both a thief and a fool. The beauty of it hit me like a perfectly executed weld. My father had seen this coming years before it happened. He'd watched Brenda long enough to know exactly what kind of woman she was, the kind who sees price tags where other people see priceless memories. So, he'd set a trap, patient and precise, waiting for her to step into it. "There's an audio message too," Brett said, plugging the device into a laptop in his office. "Your father was very specific about when this should be played." He hit the space bar. My dad's voice filled the small room, gruff and warm and impossible to mistake. Hearing it was like having a ghost walk up and shake your hand. "Wade," he said, like he was sitting right next to me, "if you're hearing this, it means someone didn't respect what wasn't theirs. I'm sorry you had to deal with that, son." I had to sit down. Brett quietly stepped outside, giving me space to hear my father's last words to me. "I set things up clean," Dad continued. "No tricks, no drama, just the right way. That truck represents everything I tried to teach you about honest work and keeping your word. Don't let anybody take that from you." His voice was steady, matter of fact, the way it always was when he was teaching me something important. "Do it right, Wade. Do it calm. Don't get angry, get methodical. Document everything, follow the law, and let justice work the way it's supposed to. And remember, legacy isn't about the money, it's about the lines you draw." There was a pause, the sound of him taking a breath. "One more thing. That woman you married, she's not family. Family doesn't steal from family. When this is over, you'll know who you can trust and who you can't. Trust is earned, son, and she spent hers." The recording ended. I sat there in the silence, staring at legal papers that proved my father had been 3 moves ahead of everyone else, including me. He'd known this day would come, known exactly how it would play out, and he'd left me everything I needed to handle it the right way. Brett came back with a cup of coffee and a sympathetic expression. "We stopped the sale the minute our legal team flagged the title issues," he said. "The money's frozen in escrow pending resolution. What happens next is up to you." I looked out the window at the truck, then at the trust documents in my hands. For the first time since I'd walked into that empty garage, I smiled. Not a happy smile, but the cold, satisfied smile of a man who just realized he's holding all the cards. "What happens next," I said, "is I call my lawyer. Because my father had taught me this too. Patience isn't just a virtue, it's a weapon. And sometimes the sweetest revenge is just letting thieves discover they've robbed the wrong man." The legal part moved like a freight train once I had the paperwork. Turns out when you have a valid trust and proper documentation, the system works exactly like it's supposed to. My father's lawyer filed the injunction within hours. The dealership's legal team cooperated fully, and Shane's $35,000 disappeared back into escrow faster than his latest cryptocurrency scheme. I didn't tell Brenda about the truck right away. "Patience," my father had said. "Let justice work the way it's supposed to." So I let her think everything was proceeding according to plan while lawyers made their phone calls and papers got filed in triplicate. Sometimes the sweetest revenge is just letting people hang themselves with their own rope. The call came on a Thursday afternoon while Brenda was doing her makeup, getting ready to show another overpriced house to another couple who thought they could afford more than they could. I watched her face in the bathroom mirror, pretending to read the newspaper while she applied lipstick that cost more than most people make in an hour. Her phone rang. She glanced at the caller ID, frowned, then answered with her professional realtor voice. Brenda Tucker speaking. "Mrs. Tucker, this is Brett Hoffman from Mountain View Classic Cars. We need to discuss the Ford F-250 transaction immediately." I watched her expression change through the mirror, like watching a building collapse in slow motion. Confusion first, then concern, then something that looked distinctly like panic. "I'm sorry, what's the problem?" she said, her voice climbing half an octave. "There's been a significant complication with the title transfer," Brett continued. "All business now. The vehicle was held in an irrevocable trust. Your husband is the sole beneficiary. The sale cannot proceed as arranged." She started making excuses, talking about paperwork and technicalities, and how she'd handled everything properly, but Brett cut through her words like a torch through tin. "Ma'am, our legal team has reviewed the documentation. The transaction was invalid from the moment it was initiated. The funds have been frozen pending resolution. We'll need all parties to return immediately to address this matter." When she hung up, Brenda turned around like she was ready to go to war. Her face had gone pale under all that expensive makeup. "You did this," she said. "I followed the law," I replied, not looking up from my newspaper. "There's a difference. You went behind my back. You sold my father's truck behind mine." She grabbed her purse like she was planning to flee the country. "This is ridiculous. Aaron said there might be paperwork issues, but nothing like this." Aaron, I filed that name away for future reference, so she'd known about potential problems and gone ahead anyway. Just like her to shoot first and deal with the consequences later, especially when those consequences would fall on someone else. Shane showed up an hour later, storming through the front door like a hurricane in designer clothes. His face was red, his expensive jacket was half unzipped, and he looked like he'd been crying. Not the attractive kind of crying you see in movies, but the ugly, snotty kind that happens when spoiled children realize the world doesn't actually owe them anything. "What the hell did you do?" he demanded, pointing at me like I'd personally ruined his life. I set down my coffee and looked at him calmly. "What exactly did you do to earn $35,000? "That's not the point," Shane said, but his voice cracked like a 13-year-old's. "The venue is calling. The caterer wants answers. You froze my money." "Your money?" I kept my voice level, the way my father had taught me when dealing with people who needed to be educated about reality. "What exactly makes it yours?" "Mom said you were cool with it," he said, but he wasn't looking at me anymore. He was looking at his mother, and for the first time in his worthless life, Shane was beginning to understand that Mommy couldn't fix everything. "Your mother lied," I said simply. Brenda stepped between us like she was still in control of the situation. "This is about punishment. You're punishing us for making a decision while you were gone." "No," I said. "This is about respecting what doesn't belong to you. Something my father tried to teach, something you never learned." Shane's face twisted into something ugly, the mask slipping, revealing the entitled brat underneath all that Instagram swagger. "If this ruins my wedding, I'll sue you." I almost laughed. "Get in line." "You don't understand," Shane said, his voice getting higher and more desperate. "The deposits are non-refundable. The band, the flowers, the photographer. Everything's booked. Jessica's parents already sent out invitations." Jessica? The poor girl who'd agreed to marry this train wreck, probably because she'd never seen him under pressure before. I wondered if she knew she was about to marry a man whose first instinct when things got difficult was to blame everyone, except himself. "Maybe you should have thought about that before you spent money that wasn't yours," I suggested. That's when Shane really lost it, started yelling about family loyalty and helping each other out, and how I was destroying his future over some old truck. His voice echoed off the kitchen walls, high and panicky, the sound of a man realizing his house of cards was falling down. Brenda tried to calm him down, but it was too late. The damage was done. Her precious boy was showing his true colors, and they weren't pretty. "The venue coordinator called this morning," Shane continued, wiping his nose with the back of his hand. "They want payment confirmation by tomorrow, or they're giving our slot to someone else. Jessica's crying. Her dress cost $3,000, the ring cost $4,000. I listened to his itemized breakdown of wedding expenses with the detached interest of an accountant reviewing someone else's bad decisions. $7,000 for a dress and a ring, but not a penny earned through his own sweat. "Sounds expensive," I said. "Good thing you've got that social media empire to fall back on." The court date was set for the following Tuesday. Simple matter, really, but Brenda hired a lawyer anyway. Some guy in an expensive suit who specialized in family disputes. The kind of lawyer who makes his living convincing judges that theft isn't really theft when it happens between relatives. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. The morning of the hearing, I put on my best jeans and a clean button-down shirt, the same outfit I'd worn to my father's funeral. In the mirror, I looked like exactly what I was, a working man who'd been wronged and intended to see it made right. No expensive suit, no designer tie, just honest clothes for an honest fight. I drove to the courthouse listening to classic rock on the radio, Sky Nerd and Petty, and the kind of music that reminds you why America used to build things that lasted. The courthouse sat on the edge of downtown like a monument to the idea that justice still meant something, even when everything else had gone sideways. Clay was waiting for me on the steps, along with two other guys from my welding crew, working men who understood the value of a handshake and keeping your word. The kind of people my father would have appreciated. They didn't say much, just nodded and fell into step beside me as we walked through the doors. Inside, the courtroom smelled like old wood and fresh coffee, and the particular tension that comes when people's lives are about to change direction. Brenda sat on one side with Shane and his fiancée Jessica, whispering furiously like they were planning a last-minute escape. When she saw me, Brenda looked away, probably realizing for the first time that this wasn't going to end the way she'd planned. Shane looked worse than I'd ever seen him, pale and sweaty in a suit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. Jessica sat frozen beside him, like she was watching her future crumble in real time, which she probably was. Poor girl was about to learn what kind of man she'd agreed to marry. Their lawyer was everything I'd expected, silver-haired, silk tie, the kind of smooth talker who charges by the syllable. He kept shuffling papers and whispering to Brenda like he was cooking up some last-minute miracle, but his face told a different story. Even expensive lawyers know a losing case when they see one. The judge was older, maybe 60, with patient gray eyes and the weathered hands of a man who'd worked for a living before he'd learned to judge other people's work. When he spoke, his voice carried the kind of authority that comes from experience, not ego. This court will now hear the matter of Tucker versus Tucker regarding the disputed sale of a 1974 Ford F-250 pickup truck. Brenda's lawyer stood up first, all polish and practiced charm. He talked about family hardship and wedding expenses, and how Mrs. Tucker had acted in good faith to help her son during a financial emergency. He made it sound almost reasonable, the way good lawyers do when they're selling fairy tales to people who ought to know better. Then it was my turn. I stood up slowly, holding the manila envelope my father had left behind, and told the truth. Simple, clean, no embellishment. The truck had been placed in an irrevocable trust. I was the sole beneficiary. The sale had been illegal from the moment it happened. The judge read through the trust documents carefully, while Brenda's lawyer made noise about technicalities and family obligations. But paperwork doesn't lie. And my father had been thorough in the way that only career blue-collar men know how to be thorough. "This is a valid trust," the judge said finally. "The vehicle was not marital property. Mrs. Tucker had no authority to sell it." Shane's lawyer tried one last desperate play. "Your Honor, the family was facing legitimate financial hardship. The wedding deposits were due, and Mr. Tucker was unavailable for consultation due to his work commitments." The judge looked at him over his glasses with the expression of a man who'd heard every excuse in the book and wasn't buying any of them today. "Counselor, the law doesn't recognize financial convenience as grounds for theft. If the family needed money, there are legal ways to obtain it. Taking someone else's property without permission isn't one of them." That's when Clay stood up, holding his hat in his hands like he was in church. "Your Honor, may I say something?" The judge nodded. "Proceed." "I knew Keith Tucker for 15 years. Good man, honest worker, taught his son everything worth knowing about earning what you keep. That truck wasn't just transportation. It was a father's legacy to his son, built with his own hands over decades of work. Some things shouldn't have a price tag, and some people shouldn't be able to sell what they never owned." The judge nodded once, slow and final. "The sale is invalid. All funds are to be returned to the dealership immediately. Mr. Wade Tucker is the rightful owner of the vehicle. Court costs and legal fees will be borne by the party who initiated the improper sale." The gavel came down like the final weld on a perfect joint. Shane made a sound like a wounded animal. Jessica started crying, probably realizing her fairy tale wedding had just turned into a clearance rack nightmare. Brenda just sat there staring at her hands. finally understanding that the world doesn't actually revolve around her real estate commissions. I drove back to Fort Collins that afternoon to pick up the truck. Brett had it detailed and waiting, keys hanging from the same brass keychain my father had used for 20 years. When I slid into the driver's seat, the leather creaked the same way it always had, and for the first time since the funeral, I could breathe all the way in. The engine turned over on the first try, smooth and strong and dependable. I drove home slow, windows down, listening to the sound of American iron and honest craftsmanship. When I pulled into the driveway, Brenda's things were already gone. Boxes loaded, closets cleaned out, probably moving in with Shane and Jessica to help them figure out how to pay for a wedding with Monopoly money. We didn't fight about the divorce. Some endings don't need shouting. That weekend, I drove the truck to the Union Hall, parked it where everyone could see the perfect paint job and the custom welding rack my father had built by hand. The older guys came over, ran their hands along the bed rails, nodded their approval. "Keith's truck," one of them said. "Yeah," I said. "It is." If this story reminds you of someone who taught you the difference between what's easy and what's right, remember them. And if you believe that standing firm doesn't mean losing yourself, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Stay with us for the next one.